Hi there. This video is addressing the question of just how much is George R.R. Martin actually involved in writing the Long Night prequel to Game of Thrones, which HBO has ordered a pilot episode for. Specifically, it's about an interview where he talked about this in the New York Times from last November, and I was making a much longer analysis of the whole Long Night prequel. That's going to be 2 hours long. I split this off from that to put it out first just to bring it to everyone's attention, because it seems pretty important. That I'm one of the admins on Game of Thrones Wiki, so I was updating our article on the Long Night prequel, and I added in a whole new subsection on writing, what we know of what writers are attached to it. So I'm going to link that in the description box below. Please check that out, but that's just slightly longer than this. But it's really just talking about what he said in this New York Times piece, so I'm going to read it off to you now. Question: how does Jane Goldman's vision vary from your original concept with the Age of Heroes and the first coming of the White Walkers and the Long Night? Jane Goldman is the showrunner that's attached to this. And George R.R. Martin said, if you look at the published books so far, there is really very little material about it. The Age of Heroes and the Long Night. A sentence here, a sentence there. Old Nan tells a tale that takes up a paragraph. That if you haven't read the books, if you're just going by the TV series, that in Season 1, when Old Nan gives that story about what the Long Night was like in the first coming of the White Walkers, that's pretty much straight from the books, and that's pretty much all the books actually said. That if you're a TV-only viewer, if you haven't read the books, you know as much about it as someone who read the huge novels. There really isn't much in print about it, and Martin has also said he doesn't even have ideas for it that he never published. There aren't notes on it or anything. It's not a very well-developed era. It's 8,000 years ago. It's the earliest era in their history. It's prehistory, an age of legends and magic. But he said, there's really not much on it. So Jane had to create the characters. She had to create the settings and some of the events. Like, she didn't come up with the idea of White Walkers and them attacking, but all sorts of other events she had to come up with. And we had to look at everything that was said and say, okay, here's what was said at this point. We might need to be consistent with that, make it consistent with what we said about that other figure in the Long Night. We kicked around some ideas, and I made some suggestions. But mostly it's been Jane running with it. So, go over that again. Please check out the link for this, but he admitted, he said, Martin did not create the plot outline or the characters or basic setting details of the Long Night prequel. That society was very different in the prehistory of Westeros. He didn't invent new social structures or religions or anything else that might appear in it. Any characters appearing in it are really invented by Jane. Like we have a name or two, like Bran the Builder, but anything about his specific personality or even, literally all we know about Bran the Builder is one sentence. He was the founder of House Stark who built the wall and built Winterfell. Anything beyond that is family details. Anything they do would be an invention of Jane. He didn't say, well, I made some of the characters. And, obviously any prequel would have to invent some characters. He's saying she made all the characters. He didn't even give her an outline. It's not that he gave her an outline and she filled it in. She made a TV show outline and asked him if he had any advice on it, if he had any feedback on it. This is what he said. And yes, he can make some suggestions, but what that really reminds me of is how, from Season 5 onwards, he's really distanced himself from the Game of Thrones TV show, and that's how they described his relationship with the writers for things like TV Dorne Season 5. That he had I saw a few people really not paying attention and going, well, Martin must have wanted it this way because they're doing it. That no, the writers disagreed with him and wanted to do something else for TV Dorne. That the basic outline of, they cut out Dorne's POV character, Arianne Martell, the main Martell character. They cut her out, marginalized Doran Martell, then killed him off. And Ilaria is a minor character and a nice person who doesn't want war in the books, and they were just showing off the actress by having Indira Varma be the main character and all this rewrite stuff, and then it wasn't working, so they randomly kill people off. None of that outline of, oh, we gotta save Marcella and stuff, which is pretty corny. He had no control over any of that on the outline level. All he could do was point out a few things which they weren't beholden to, like he had to send them back a note saying when Jamie first appears on the beach in this new Dorne storyline and gets attacked by Dornish bodyguards, in the original version, Jamie fought them off really well, and he had to send a note pointing out, guys, remember that Jamie had his sword hand cut off, and it's a plot point that he can't fight that well anymore? So they had to go back and redo the whole fight scene. So if you're saying, well, Martin must have control over the Long Night prequel, how much control did he have over Dorne? And that's a worst-case scenario, mind you. I mean, it could be better than that, but he was reduced to, well, when before we've heard of, well, I make suggestions, it was stuff like, well, we're completely rewriting Dorne, but I at least could suggest to them, remember that Jamie can't fight well. And I talk about this more in the wiki write-up, please check it out, because I made a whole subheader on this, on the title, that if you've been paying attention to the news, Martin has been fighting with HBO about the title itself. He does not have control over the title of this prequel. Every couple of months, he'll say in his blog again, well, I'd prefer the title Long Night, but I don't know what HBO wants. And then he'll come back and say, HBO yelled at me not to say what the title is, that I prefer Long Night. That he really has no control over that. And I link this in the article, I'll link it here too, this nice op-ed by TheRinger.com pointing out, it is really sad and says something that this isn't a show by and from Martin, one of the great sci-fi fantasy literary figures of our day, the American Tolkien. He isn't even in control of the title of his own, allegedly his own work. That shows you how little he's connected to it. But then I understand, well, the marketing boys always have, oh no, we have to call it something else. Why wouldn't you call it The Long Night if it's about the White Walkers? I'm not sure. But just that shows you how little he is actually involved in this. And that's just the point I want to make of, don't use wishful thinking and assume this is going to be what you would want a Long Night prequel to be, because it's not the one Martin wants. He didn't want to make a prequel for this. But again, to be fair, on the other hand, that's just a worst-case scenario, because I'm terrified because we got burned on the Dorne thing. Much might depend on what exactly Martin meant when he said, well, I gave her some suggestions. Well, worst-case scenario, it's a small detail, like with Dorne and Jamie's sword hand, but when he says, I gave a suggestion, maybe he means an entire subplot, like, oh yeah, these people should have a war together, and that would last like a season. It depends on the impact of what exactly he said. And perhaps this is one short paragraph in an interview. Maybe he's just being a little humble. How much can we read into it? Well, I made some suggestions. It could be more than that, but the implications aren't looking good right now, and I have to go by evidence we have in hand. And I hope we get more evidence, but right now, and just fundamentally, he ended that statement, the answer to that question, with the exact phrase that the Long Night prequel is, quote, mostly Jane, and not him. Well, it's mostly Jane running it. It's hard to interpret that otherwise, so I would want to be optimistic, but I have to have this rooted in evidence. Which is hard to do, because it's been 8 months since they announced this, and they told us nothing about it, other than, well, it's about the Long Night, and ancient Westeros, and characters from the East might show up, which we know the Azor Ahai legend about who defeated the White Walkers might be in it, but what exactly that means, we have no idea. I hope we get characters from Asshai in it, but even it's so vague, it's useless. And we've even had castings, and they won't give us names. That sooner or later, they will have to reveal this to us, because right now they're coasting along on blind hype. Because it's easy to love something you know nothing about by just pouring all of your hopes into it. So Jane Goldman herself hasn't made any comments about the project, or her level of interaction with Martin. Specifically, that's one of the top questions. How much are you working with Martin on this? And to be clear, I'm not trying to be demanding of Miss Goldman personally, that, oh, why isn't she giving fan-sides interviews? No, nothing like that. She's had problems with the British press invading her private life before. I sympathize with that. She has a bad relationship with press interviews and people prying. That's fine. It's just, a canned interview over the phone with a major publication like Entertainment Weekly, which has pretty much an exclusive relationship with HBO and for years has been doing closed telephone interviews with Benioff and Weiss, who run Game of Thrones. I'm not saying, oh, she should be doing live Q&A and a Reddit AMA or something. No, it's just, you haven't even given a canned interview with a magazine or a press release statement of this is what we're trying to do, or a video interview. HBO has done that with the writers before. That eventually you need to start telling us about this and acknowledging, is this Martin or is this you? Entirely separate question, which I'm going to discuss in a full video. Just because they're not Martin's ideas doesn't mean they're bad. I mean, I really like that Star Wars Rebels cartoon, which was only a few bits and pieces of advice from Lucas himself. They said, well, we asked Lucas a few questions about the Force and stuff just to get it right, but he's not part of the writing staff. And that isn't a problem. It's a franchise. I'm wary of how HBO is really hyping up. Martin is a co-creator. He is not a co-creator on this. That is a technical fiction. He is listed as a co-creator. He did not co-write the script with Goldman. He was able to give her some advice, which at times she incorporated, but the original outline and character designs, the character setup, and the settings, that's all her, which he then tried to give her a piece of advice here or there on, and these aren't really based on book characters. So it's the hype I'm really reacting to, and maybe that's just HBO marketing messing with us. They need to hype it. Why wouldn't you hype? Oh, it's from Martin. It's not really from Martin. So what exactly has Jane shown us to convince us to like her prequel, which is only one of 4 separate prequels that they are considering? The info is leaked out about the Valyria prequel from Max Borenstein, which seems really exciting. It's just an outline. I don't know if the dialogue is good, but we've gotten information and it looks pretty nice, whereas there seems to be a pretty big news blackout on this. What are they doing? I don't know, but Martin is not really a co-writer on this. Please check out the links below to the full article on this in Game of Thrones Wiki.